the execution of Nazi leader Karl Hermann Frank, witnessed by thousands. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. On the morning of May 22, 1946, the war in Europe was already over. The streets of Prague were no longer occupied by foreign troops, and the flags of a free nation once again flew over the city. Yet inside the courtyard of a single prison, history had not finished speaking. Thousands gathered, not to celebrate victory, but to witness a moment many believed had been delayed for years. There were no closed doors, no quiet transfer in the night. What unfolded that day was meant to be seen, clearly, publicly, and without ambiguity. This was not a battlefield reckoning. It was a moral one. At the center of it stood a man whose authority had once decided who lived and who disappeared. The question facing the nation was no longer what he had done, but how justice should respond after such devastation, and whether justice, once broken, can ever truly feel whole again. Karl Hermann Frank was never a general commanding troops in open combat. He was something far more powerful in an occupied land. A senior administrator with sweeping authority over daily life and death. As the highest SS and police leader in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, his power did not come from the front lines, but from paperwork, orders, and enforcement. Appointed by senior figures within the Nazi leadership, Frank became one of the central faces of occupation in the Czech lands. His role was not merely to maintain order, but to extinguish resistance, systematically and visibly. Under his authority, arrests multiplied. Public warnings became common. Entire communities learned what happened when the state decided to make an example. The defining moment of Frank's rule came in 1942 after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. In response, the occupation authorities unleashed a campaign of collective punishment. Villages were erased from maps, families were separated, names were removed from records. These actions were not improvised. They were ordered, recorded, and justified through official channels. By the time the war turned against Germany, Frank's name had become synonymous with fear. He was not remembered as a distant official, but as the embodiment of occupation itself. For many, he represented the system that had ruled through intimidation rather than consent. When Nazi authority collapsed in 1945, Frank attempted to avoid the fate he had so often assigned to others. He surrendered to Western Allied forces, perhaps believing that distance from Prague might soften what lay ahead. It did not. Within weeks, he was transferred to the newly restored Czechoslovak state, a country still grieving villages that no longer existed. His trial in Prague the following year was unlike many proceedings that followed the war. It was not hidden. The courtroom was filled with citizens, survivors, and families who had lived under his rule. This was not only a legal process, it was a public accounting. The charges were extensive and specific. They detailed decisions, signatures, and directives that tied Frank directly to the machinery of repression. He did not deny his role. Instead, he defended his actions as lawful within the framework of the regime he had served. There was no expression of regret, no acknowledgement of moral failure. That posture only deepened public anger. For a nation emerging from years of imposed silence, the trial became a space where truth was finally spoken aloud. When the verdict was delivered, it was decisive. The sentence was clear. But what followed raised a deeper question, not about guilt, but about how justice should be carried out after such trauma. The method chosen was deliberate. It drew from older legal traditions familiar to the region, and it carried symbolic weight. This was not about speed or discretion. It was about visibility. The state wanted the outcome to be witnessed, remembered, and understood. On the morning of May 22, 1946, Frank was brought into the prison courtyard. Thousands stood behind barriers. Many held photographs. Others stood silently, their presence alone a statement. This gathering was not fueled by celebration. It was marked by gravity. Frank's demeanor was described as controlled, almost distant. He made no final appeal to the crowd, no apology, no acknowledgement of the suffering that had unfolded under his authority. Officials read the sentence. The process moved forward. What followed was deeply unsettling, not because of spectacle, but because of what it represented. For years, violence had been imposed without witnesses, hidden behind walls and regulations. Now the roles were reversed. The state chose transparency, not to glorify the act, but to confront the past directly. As the moment concluded, there was no eruption of noise. no sense of triumph. What settled over the courtyard was silence. For many present, this was not about vengeance. It was about seeing an imbalance addressed, however imperfectly. In the days that followed, images and reports spread beyond Prague. International observers debated what they had seen. Some questioned whether public justice risked becoming something else entirely. Others argued that after years of secrecy and denial, visibility was essential. Within Czechoslovakia, reactions were shaped by memory. For communities that had lost relatives, homes, and futures, the event marked an end to uncertainty. Not an end to grief, but an end to impunity. Historians would later examine this moment with caution. They would ask whether justice should ever mirror the severity of the crimes it answers, whether public punishment heals or merely exposes wounds. There were no simple answers. What is clear is that Frank's authority had once depended on silence. His power thrived in fear and distance. The choice to make his sentence public reversed that dynamic. It forced a confrontation, not only with one man, but with the system he represented. The prison courtyard returned to quiet. The wooden structure remained for years, a physical reminder of a moment when a nation chose not to look away. Over time, it became part of memory rather than daily life. But memory, once formed, does not easily fade. This was not the closing chapter of the occupation's legacy. Nothing could undo what had already happened. But it marked a boundary, a moment when a society declared that authority would no longer operate without consequence. The execution of Karl Hermann Frank was not meant to erase the past. It could not restore lost lives or rebuild erased communities. What it offered instead was acknowledgement. It forced the nation and the world to face a difficult truth. When power is exercised without restraint, justice must eventually confront not only actions, but systems. And that confrontation is rarely clean or comfortable. Some will always debate whether justice should be seen or quietly administered. But for those who lived through occupation, silence had already done enough damage. The story of this day is not about punishment alone. It is about memory, responsibility, and the refusal to let authority hide behind distance ever again. Because when history teaches us anything, it is this: justice delayed leaves scars, but justice forgotten leaves the door open for it all to happen again.